Good afternoon and welcome to the video class for week 10, Tuesday the 31st of March. As we know, over the past few weeks there have been a lot of changes, and particularly last week when the Vice-Chancellor announced the extension to everything, basically. But we need to keep the show on the road somehow in these difficult times. So this class, I wanted to do a couple of things. It's mostly about film and book reviews, but I also want to talk about, first of all, the schedule and the assessments. So slide number 2. I intended at the beginning of this module to cover a number of things which unfortunately we aren't going to be able to do because we can't get out and do stuff. So if you look at the right hand middle of this slide, it says TV, film, sport and games, etc. We've done some of those activities, but some of them we can't cover. Sport and games, for example, live music we can't do. We've done art to a point with the trip to the Tate Modern, and we've done most, and we will or have done most of the others. So I apologise for that, but hopefully you understand why that is, because of the lockdown and staying indoors and all these other important things. So just looking at the left-hand side, we've done the introduction, obviously, Barely Edible. We did TV, YouTube, Netflix in week 3. Paper magazines we did. Then we had the trip to the Tate Modern. I gave you the exercise a few weeks ago, My London Lifestyle. We did podcasts last week, and today is film and books. And next week, even though it's not going to make much difference, really, because it's going to be the same again with staying indoors, we're going to be having Easter. It's going to be a bit of a hollow experience, I think, but we'll get through it, and we just need to be patient. So after Easter, I will be available for tutorials. We can do them online. We can do them over Skype. So thankfully we have the technology to be able to still offer quite a good service. So a couple more things I want to talk about on this slide. Top right, I apologise for the delay in the release of the marks for assessment 1. The reason, or 2 reasons for that, is number 1, the strike messed up the schedule, obviously, and that impacted on the availability of colleagues who can moderate such things. And then, of course, COVID-19 has escalated, and that had a massive impact on my workload. I'm actually working, it seems, about twice as many hours as I did in normal times, because I have to make videos, which take a long time, and doing online stuff and all of that sort of thing. So I apologise. I'm aiming to get the marks to you next week, at the end of next week. It won't make that much of a difference to your lives, to tell you the truth, folks, because you've got a 3-week extension for assessment 2. So the new deadline, as you now know, it's on Moodle, is Friday the 15th of May, which by my reckoning is about 6 weeks away. So I know you've got lots of other work to do for other modules. But you have loads of time to do assessment 2, and having the mark delayed by a week for assessment 1 is not going to make much difference to your lives. Even so, I do apologise for that, because I do like to be on time. Right, let's talk briefly about assessment 2, about what you can do and what you can't do. A reminder, you cannot do the same subject for assessment 2 as you did for assessment 1. So if you did a TV or Netflix or Amazon Prime show, which a lot of you did for assessment 1, you can't do another Amazon Prime, Netflix TV show for assessment 2. Likewise, if you did something like, I don't know, a podcast, you can't do it for assessment 2. Second point, if you do music, which some of you might want to do, it must be an album, not a song. You can't write, well, you could, I guess, write 800 words for one particular song, but it's difficult to do it well. And I would recommend that you do a collective piece of work. You do a collection of songs, whether it's an album or whatever. Some of the others on the list are not really possible. For example, sport and games. What we were going to do there is, for example, do a game that you've never done, or do a sport that you've never done, like ice skating. for example. But that's not possible because we're all confined to our homes. But you can, if you want, do a review of the Tate Modern, which most of you attended a couple of weeks ago, or you can do a podcast, or you can do a film or a book review. And the film or book review is the focus of this particular class. So let's cover film and book reviews. Okay, in terms of film and book reviews, you actually have a huge number of options. So you can do a standard novel, Harry Potter or John Steinbeck or George Orwell or whoever it might be, or you can do factual books. It can be basically any type of book, which includes biographies and autobiographies. Now, can I just say about that? Personally, I prefer biographies. So that's somebody writing about somebody else's life. An autobiography, obviously, is somebody writing about their own life. The problem with autobiographies, in my mind, is that they tend to leave all the good stuff out, all the embarrassing stuff. There are exceptions, and one good exception is an autobiography I read recently about Elton John, who is extremely honest and forthright about his life. So you've got a massive choice of books. In terms of film, you can do movies. When I say movies, what I mean there is something that you go and watch at the cinema, Harry Potter, a superhero movie, a rom-com, whatever it might be. It has to be feature length, so please don't do Game of Thrones or anything like that. So don't do box sets or series. It needs to be a feature length film. When I say feature length, the standard sort of length of a film, a feature length film, is 90 minutes, an hour and a half. So something of that description. The other thing you can do, which for those of you who speak another language, could be a really good option, is you can do a foreign language film. So if there's a film that you like in Arabic or French or whatever it might be, you can do a foreign language film. Please note that the point there in green, which is one of the criteria, credit will be given for originality. So if it's a movie that I've never heard of, something really obscure, and you do a review and you do it well, you'll get a good mark for originality. And one more point in terms of options, your choice does not have to be a new release. So it can be a movie made 10, 15, 20, 50 years ago. So again, originality. You don't have to do something which has just come out. It can be something which was made some time ago. So the thing about novels, next slide, the thing about novels and movies is that they are quite similar. Notice here I'm saying novels rather than books in general. So novels meaning a story, and movies tend to be stories about people doing stuff. So they are actually very, very similar in some ways. They're different media, obviously, but they are very similar. So each novel or movie has what's called a genre. So a genre is what type, where does it fit? What type of story is it? So it could be a war film, it could be a rom-com, it can be a buddy movie, it can be a superhero movie. So you need to sort of acknowledge and make a note of what the genre is when you describe it. Then we have the plot, in other words, what is the story about? The classic story, Shakespeare used it, in fact all cultures have used it, is boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. So that is the general plot. Well, think about a James Bond film. You know, James Bond has the mission of finding the villain and stopping him blowing up the world. That's the plot. Also related to that, there's always, or usually, a good story will have a subplot. In other words, another plot that's going on behind the scenes that the protagonist, the main character, doesn't know about, or he or she might know about. So going back to James Bond is trying to catch the villain, but little does he know that the Russian Secret Service is trying to assassinate him, and they're chasing him. So that's the subplot. You've got characters in novels and in movies. So again, James Bond, you've got the glamorous spy, the Russian spy who's trying to seduce him or whatever. That might be another character. You've got the villain. You've got James Bond's boss back at base who's giving him directions. Again, you get the characters in novels and in movies. You've got the dialogue. how they speak to each other, how they convey information with their voices. And then you have things like the atmosphere of a movie. It can be very bleak, or it can be sort of futuristic, or it can be romantic, soft focus, all that sort of stuff. And also, some films and books have a deeper meaning. Think here about Animal Farm, which is a book you all know. So that's on the surface a book about animals in a farm, but it's also very political, and it's an allegory basically. So it's illustrating something very, very deep through rather simplistic methods. There are, of course, differences between novels and movies, even though they're very similar at times. Obviously, movies are visual. You can see things. You can see colours and scenes and different situations that the characters go into. Something that movie reviewers talk about is photography, what the images look like. There's actually a lot of thought that goes into what the camera is pointed at, basically. Some movies, obviously, especially superhero movies these days and war movies, they rely on special effects and CGI. Other movies, if it's a musical, obviously, have notable music, but they also have background music and theme tunes. And sometimes, if you go to a movie theatre these days, a cinema, they have enormous sound, which sometimes actually dominates the film. So the important thing here, just to recap, is that novels and movies are actually really similar, even though they're different media. So there are common features of both novels and movies. So on that basis, I'll give you some general guidance about film and novels. Firstly, as always, you need to assume that your reader has never seen the movie or read the book. So you need a very brief description of what it's about. Typically with reviews, as we'll see in a minute, this tends to be very early in the article, and it tends to be very short. And I read a book once, I forget who it was by, but it was a famous movie producer, and he said you should be able to condense what a film is about in one sentence. And if you can't do that, if it's too complicated, then people aren't going to watch it. So you need to be able to convey that with your words. Also, you need to position the movie or the book in a genre: war, superhero, rom-com, road trip, buddy movie, whatever it might be. A second point, your article needs to cover the plot and the subplot without giving away the ending. This is the classic spoiler alert. So you need to be able to tell us what the film is about and what its trajectory is. It moves from A to B to C and so on, without giving too much away. You also need to tell us about the main characters, the protagonist. With the word protagonist, you probably heard what it means is the main character. So James Bond, Harry Potter, whoever it might be. And within your article, you need to tell us about what their defining characteristics are. James Bond might be described as sort of cruel or focused or determined or whatever it might be. Next point, think about how the characters interact. So where are the tensions? Are they allies or are they enemies, for example? Next point, give the reader, if it's necessary, if it's a quite obscure film or book in particular, compare it to something else that the reader might know about, because that will give the reader a point of reference. You also need to convey the impact of the film or the book on the viewer or the reader. Does it have twists and turns? Is it surprising? Does it generate emotions of sadness or happiness or joy? Is it funny? Is it scary? And also, is it boring at times? So some films, some books are extremely boring, but sometimes they go through phases. There's a boring period and then a really exciting period. So think about how you're going to convey that. Point 7, as always, do not try and condense the whole stories into 800 words. You need to be selective. Don't say he did this and then she did that and then she said this and then this happened, because you'll run out of space. So you need to condense it and make your review very readable. As always, point 8, don't over describe. Make sure you leave room for evaluation. And by extension, use a variety of evaluative techniques, similes, adjectives, and so on. And finally, last but not least, as always, make sure when you write it, it has a gripping introduction and a compelling last paragraph. So don't start your article with a sentence something like, Harry Potter is a story of a young boy who becomes whatever. write something that's going to drag the reader in right at the beginning. And then as you continue the article, you can talk in more detail about the plot, the characters, and so on. So that's general guidance which applies to both film and novels. For the next few slides, what I've done in tried and tested fashion is to give you some examples of film reviews that have been written by the professionals and published in the media. So this is what you should be aiming for. This is proper journalism, and this is how it's done. So the first slide here, there's two very short reviews are from The Week magazine, which you're familiar with because we did it in class a few weeks ago. They're about 200 words each, very short reviews. So yours obviously has to be longer than this. And don't forget, with the Week, what it does is it accumulates journalism from other publications. So you'll notice in the first one about Onward, for example, there's a journalist from the Daily Mail quoted. There's also somebody from the Financial Times, and there's also somebody from the Independent. So it's an accumulation of reviews. So it's a combined review essentially. But if we take a closer look at these two reviews, slide number 7, let me just go through some of the elements of it. On the top left, you'll notice that when you write a review, obviously you put the name of the film, but the really important person is not so much the actor or the actress, it's the director, in this case Dan Scanlon. The other thing that's always mentioned is the the time length. You'll notice here 1 hour and 47, and the one underneath is actually very similar in length, 144. And the letter denotes the rating of the film, so whether it's suitable for children or adults. And then underneath that, you've got a couple of words: a general assessment, more emotional wizardry from Pixar, and then this one gets 4 stars. You'll notice the box that I've highlighted there about Onward gives a very brief description of the main characters and the plot. So notice here, like I said before, ideally you should be able to sum up in a sentence what the film is about. Obviously later on in the film you can talk in more detail about the plot and the subplot and the characters and the dialogue, but you have to tell the reader very early on, typically, what the film is about, and you should be able to do that in very, very few words. In the film underneath, Escape from Pretoria, you'll notice on the left that I've said that you need to discuss the actors' performances and link them to the characters. So for example, James Bond, bracket Daniel Craig. In Escape from Pretoria, the main actor is Daniel Radcliffe, famous obviously for Harry Potter. And what I've highlighted there is the reviewer's evaluation of the acting and the film as a whole. So Kevin Mayer of The Times says, "Flat and derivative, Escape from Pretoria is no one's finest hour. The politics are clumsy, the cast's accents are just appalling, and Daniel Radcliffe delivers a strangely blank central performance in which he veers between looking determined and looking fearful and determined." So those two very short reviews actually contain quite a lot of good examples of what you're trying to achieve. Next slide. I've given you a couple more reviews from the week here, again about 200 words each, different types of films, different genre, so you can see again how the professionals do it. I'm not going to go through those in detail, you can read those at your leisure. And the next slide, slide 9, what I've done on the left hand side is included a much longer review, this time from the Spectator magazine. That's about 700 words. I've actually clipped it out in paper, just going back to the Stone Age and taken a photograph of it, but you can zoom in and read it. And you'll notice here what the journalist Deborah Ross has done, which is normal, is giving the article a title. So she's used that phrase, "sisters are doing it for themselves," which, as I remember, is a title of a song way back from the 70s. So this movie is called Military Wives. It's about a group of women who get together and form a choir. So that title is kind of relevant. You know, it's relatively relatively relevant. It's a play on words. So she's come up with a title. So you need to do that when you submit assessment 2. Don't just say the film is called Military Wives. Come up with a title. Think about it as real journalism. So over on the right of this slide, I've given you some examples here, but there are loads of film reviews out there available online, and you can find them 2 places I'd direct you to. Specialist movie magazines. The most famous one in the UK is called Empire. Find it on Google, see if you can read the reviews and see how the journalists do it. As always, you learn to become good journalists by following what the professionals do. And also look in the culture sections of newspapers, again available online. The most famous film reviewer in the UK, and if you want to get a job as a film reviewer, this is the person who should be your role model, is a guy called Mark Kermode. He also does film programs. You see him on TV reviewing films. There's a little picture of him with his glasses. And he became famous basically for writing for The Observer and The Guardian. And if you, again, Google him, find him on The Guardian and read his reviews, he basically is top of the tree. And if you want to be a film reviewer, you could do a lot worse than learn from the master to see how Mark Kermode does it. Okay, moving on swiftly to book reviews. Now, in last week's video, I gave you some guidance on books. Just a reminder, this is a list of books which I gave you in week 1, and I asked you all if you'd read them. And I recommended that if you wanted to do a book review, then you could do a lot worse than choosing one of these. They're all, as I said last week, really top quality, diverse. Men and women have written these books from different parts of the world. They're totally different subjects, different lengths, different ages. So you've got an enormous choice. On the next slide, I've just given you a bit of guidance in terms of how to choose your book. Basically, the first thing to do is to read the reviews on Amazon. Just a couple of 100-word reviews. They'll tell you what the books are all about, and if it appeals to you, then choose one and then order it. As I said last week, as far as I know, Amazon is still delivering. And you can get second-hand books if money's a bit tight, as it probably is, or you can buy a new book. And obviously, when it arrives, what your mission is, obviously, is to read it. And when you read it, make notes in a notebook. And I also use post-it notes, you know, the little yellow and orange Dayglow stickers that you can put of notable moments in the book, and then you can write on those and remind yourself why you've highlighted that particular page. So what you shouldn't do is sit down with your book and just read it, because you'll forget stuff and then you'll have to read it again to find notable moments and notable bits of dialogue. So next slide. What I've done here, this again comes from the week, and this is relevant for a couple of reasons. The first reason it's relevant is it's actually very, very skillfully done. It's not a lot of words. These are 6 very short reviews written by Joanna Lumley, who is these days noted for her travel reports on TV. She's done programs about the Trans-Siberian Railway and traveling in Japan and India and places like that. So she's become a bit of an expert in travel journalism. So clearly the editor here has said, okay, Joanna, give us 6 of your best travel books. So she's very skillfully, within about 30 words per book, given us a brief synopsis and a few words of evaluation. And as I said, it's actually very, very well done. And what she's done is given us the title, the author, the publisher, a quick overview of what the book's about and what makes it stand out for her. The second reason it's relevant is essentially this is what I'd like you to do for your exercise this week. I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But when you get a bit of time, just read those brief reviews and just see how she chooses her words very carefully and encapsulates what the book's about in 30 words or less. Next slide. There are obviously longer book reviews available. This is one I read a couple of weeks ago in the New Statesman, a magazine that you're familiar with because we did it in class a few weeks ago. This is a book called The Gatekeeper by Kate Fall. Right, so this isn't a novel. This is a factual book. Kate Fall was a chief of staff, a political advisor, basically, for David Cameron. Remember him, the Prime Minister, a few years ago? And she talks about life in Downing Street and the characters behind the scenes and what they got up to and the dramas and the difficult moments and the joys of working in Downing Street. So as I said a few minutes ago, you don't have to do a novel. You can do something like this. So this is really a factual book, stroke biography, because it talks about people. And just in terms of length, it's about 1,000 words. So your review for assessment 2, if you do a book, needs to kind of be almost this length. And again, there are loads of examples of book reviews online. So I'm not going to put a load more up here. I've given you some short ones in the previous slide. Here's a long one. Find some more examples online. And again, the culture sections of newspapers are the best places to find these things. Moving on to the next slide. So I said a few slides ago that books, or novels in particular, and film reviews are very similar. So take your guidance from that slide. Here's a few more hints specifically for books. As I said, very similar to film reviews, but obviously no images. So it's the same deal, if you like, with podcasts. No images in podcasts, so you have to create the images, essentially. And it's the same when you're writing a book review. So language is all important. It's all about the words with a book review. So when you're reading the book, ask yourself some questions. Can you actually see the places and people? A good writer would be able to describe, I don't know, a mountaintop or a farm or a political story using very vivid descriptions of the people and the places. The second thing to think about is the dialogue natural and believable? It's actually quite difficult to write really natural dialogue, and good writers can do it and bad writers can't. They make it sound cliched and they make it sound not believable. And really the bottom line when it comes to book reviews, and this is how I always judge a book, is it what they call a page turner? Are you eager to turn the next page and move on to the next chapter and see how it works out, how the story actually unfolds, and do you care? I mean, do you care about the characters? Does the book have a good pace? Is it slow or is it quick or is it too fast? So is the book a page turner? So there's some other things you might want to think about when you're doing your book review. And wrapping up for today, an exercise. So what I'd like you to do this week, ladies and gentlemen, is be inspired by Joanna Lumley. And as we saw before, she wrote 6 very tightly focused and informative reviews of 6 travel books. So using this piece as inspiration, what I'd like you to do is to write 6 mini reviews of about 30 words each. And the brief is slightly different to what Joanna's done. You can do either 6 books if you like your books, or if you prefer films, you can do 6 films, or 3 of each. So 3 films and 3 books. And that should be quite easy to do, really. So you need to think back to all the stuff, the films and the books over the years that have made an impression of you, and follow the format that Joanna's done. So title, the author or the director, and the year in which it was written or made. Describe and evaluate in very brief terms. And just to remind you, and I'm sure you know this now because I said it in week 1 and I've said it ever since, every subsequent week, there are 3 golden rules in writing reviews. You need to describe, you need to evaluate, and make sure you write for your audience, which, as you know by now, is the readers of the student magazine, typically 18 to 22-year-old students at the University of Roehampton. So you're writing for your peer group. And when you've written your 6 mini reviews, proofread your work, as always, check for spelling, check for punctuation, submit them, and the deadline, as always, is a Friday, so Friday the 3rd of April, and please make sure that you have them in my inbox by 5 p.m. Because deadlines are still all important. And just wrapping up, just finishing off, looking forward, let's not forget assessment number 2, 800 words. The new deadline is May the 15th. And as I said, I'll keep you updated on this, but basically next week and the week after is the Easter break. But I will be around. I'm not planning, obviously, on going anywhere. I will be checking my email. It might be a little bit slower than normal in responding, but I will do my best. I'm still here. We still care about you, obviously, and we're still providing you with hopefully high quality education and tuition and guidance and everything else that goes with higher education experience. So I'm still around. So if anybody has any questions, or you want to send me drafts, or you would need some advice or guidance, then you know where to find me. So send your questions by email, and hopefully everybody's okay and safe and sound. You've got plenty of food. It's certainly, looking on the bright side, a good opportunity to start reading and to watching movies. You know, we've got a bit more time on our hands these days, and we can't go out, so we need to do stuff at home. So books and films are actually a good antidote to these uncertain times. So send me any questions by email. Otherwise, good luck, and hopefully see you all soon.